Is Israel's invasion of the Gaza Strip encountering a lot more resistance than expected? Plus, is Netanyahu actually open to a ceasefire? And is the U.S. State Department starting to break and fracture under the strain of U.S.'s nonsense policy? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's November 7th, 2023. This is your daily unbiased Israel-Hamas update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, let's take a look at the tactical situation here. Now, there's a couple of things I think are really noteworthy. The first is, you may notice that other than these few neighborhoods on the outskirts of Beit Hanun, there's been a little Israeli progress. You can see in terms of these high density urban areas, the Israelis have taken literally 5 or 6 neighborhoods. And this should really, neighborhoods is generous, city blocks of just one corner of Gaza City. Okay. And bear in mind, this invasion has been going on for some time. You can also see here that while they are sort of operating in some of these denser, increasingly dense urban areas, you can see that there is a stark difference between the density here and then the density of some of these highly urban areas, basically everything beyond this Salah Khalaf Street. And once you get into these look at the density of some of these refugee camp buildings. They are going to have their work cut out for them. And that's why I think you're seeing in the map here a lot of reports of fighting in and around this region. They're certainly driving down to the coast to try to link these, but you can see they're starting to stall out and lose their momentum. The reason is pretty simple. When you have armored forces, they can't operate in cities, period. That's just how it goes, right? You can bring a tank into these city streets, but what is a tank? Think about what makes a tank's main gun so effective. It's that it can see and shoot a long way, right? A soldier can carry a rocket launcher by themselves, right? A tank is supposed to have impenetrable armor, and it's sort of true, but when you allow infantry forces to get up close to tanks, all the things that make a tank lose their advantages, right? A well-placed explosive near a track or a fuel tank will detonate the tank or turn it into a mobility kill. And when you have a tank lose its mobility in a dense urban street, remember, now you have to get another vehicle to tow it out. But you may not literally be able to get 2 tanks side by side to each other. So now you have a tank and a crew that are a sitting duck, and they have to get protected. You have to stop. You have to secure the tank with light infantry. You have to clear the buildings around the tank, right? And wait for a recovery vehicle, right? Remember, in a typical tank brigade, you might have one of these things. And that is what you can, and tanks can sometimes do like vehicle recovery. But you have the same problem. If one tank gets disabled in an ambush, throwing another tank next to it is going to make things worse. And when you have an armored vehicle get disabled, it also sticks in that road. It becomes a roadblock. So now your other tanks can't pass through it. You created a traffic jam. So when you have these high density urban areas where they restrict, you can see how this doesn't restrict tank maneuver. They can go around some of these buildings, knock out a courtyard wall, push through it. The tanks can still turn and spin and maneuver. Past here, look at these buildings. The tanks are not going to be able to turn and maneuver. And remember, all while Israel is moving into this, Hamas fighters are locking these places down. They're increasing the barriers, making them even harder to maneuver. And it's going to, Israel, if they haven't recognized already, it's not going to be an easy fight for them. It doesn't look like it is by any stretch. Hamas has dropped a lot of videos of their fighters, and while some of them look pretty inept, like you see from typical sort of poorly trained militia, a lot of these tactics look like they are achieving some serious battlefield effects, especially on Israeli armor, that it can't quickly produce more of. Remember, that's the other problem, right? If you have a limited number of main battle tanks, you can't afford to lose that many. And if you're interested in seeing some of the footage, I'm dropping some analysis later today on my site, Combat Vet News. Because I cover war content, right? I don't get a lot of sponsors. YouTube really doesn't care much for my footage or from my analysis. And so when I want to do the deep dive analysis of the real combat on the ground, the GoPro footage, I do it on Combat Vet News. The videos drop twice a week. They're for premium members, but any one of these tiers gets you access. But it's also the best way to support the channel. I try really hard to give you guys the unbiased tactical analysis to understand the situation from the tactics on the ground all the way to the political decision making without any bias, which is like the number one way to get yourself canceled nowadays. So I appreciate your support if you can afford it. The $5 tier, lieutenant tier, colonel tier, right? They'll get you more shout outs, but any one of you guys will get the members only contents. And again, the videos coming out of this conflict are absolutely wild. So definitely want to be a member for the video drop later today. Okay. A couple of other notes in the battlefield. You can see, again, Israel's completed its little block here. It's opened what it says are humanitarian corridors. And I think that's true, right? You're going to see Gazans evacuating south. The issue is that some of those Gazans are likely to also be Hamas members or Hamas affiliated people. And remember, Hamas also has an extensive tunnel network that it can rely on both in and outside of Gaza to move supplies back and forth. So while Hamas wants to cut off northern Gaza, it's not clear that they're actually going to achieve significant battlefield effects by doing so. And you can see while the Israelis are not fighting here, in some of these southern Gaza regions, they're still launching considerable airstrikes. And the Israelis probably, I suspect, believe that Hamas's headquarters to coordinate their fight and maybe even some of their logistics resources are concentrated here in the town of, oh my God, I can't even see it. Like, what is this? Kalkunis? And when that's probably, yeah, there you go. They claim, right, Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. And yeah, this is logically where a lot of like informal or guerrilla resistance movements, they need to have their headquarters and logistics operations in some sort of safer third-party space. And so this makes sense for Hamas. Realistically, if Hamas really wanted to be effective, they would need to get into Egyptian sovereign territory. They would need to have some kind of third-party protection to really allow them to do the coordination and logistics that are necessary. But it's not necessarily true, right? Look at the North Vietnamese in the Vietnam War. So you can also see what I thought was interesting, that there's reportedly the Israeli army operating in these neighborhoods here in Tel Al-Hawa in West Gaza. So they are probably trying to push north, but again, you're not seeing actual reported progress. You're just seeing clashes, and that's not a great sign. There's also reports of Israeli tanks being deployed within the neighborhood, but like we said, it's got to be followed. If it's followed by actual progress, then more power to them. But I also want to point out that in a true proper guerrilla war, these sort of seizing of territory is not actually the win condition. This is a prerequisite to begin it, right? Whether it's you're looking at the French in Algeria, whether you're looking at the Vietnam War, the U.S. controlled, South Vietnam for the duration of the Vietnam War, and yet it never actually seemed to end, right? And that's how irregular warfare works, right? So the Israelis may encircle all of Gaza. They may claim to control the whole of Gaza City. Unless this map doesn't have any red or blue like combat denotes on it, then you know that the fight will continue, right? The U.S. controlled Iraq after about 2 months after the initial invasion, but it spent the next 12 years trying to get actual control of the city. So I point these things out so you guys understand so you guys understand the phase of the conflict that we're really in here. Now, here's two stories I thought were really interesting. First off, Netanyahu gave an interview to ABC's Mirror and said that there would be no ceasefire without the release of hostages, which is very interesting. Right? And the thing that makes that so interesting is that it implies that we went from no ceasefire as a standalone statement to no ceasefire unless conditions are met, which is a negotiation, right? Like, it's like, no, I won't give you my car is a statement of fact. No, I won't give you my car for that price means you are now in a negotiation to sell your car, right? And so this is a really key difference. And if you understand how this sort of political signaling game works, this is a significant signal, right? And again, Netanyahu is is saying, hey, we've got to release these hostages. And it's also really telling because you notice Israel hasn't really freed that many hostages as a result of its military operation. And it knew this, right? It knows this at baseline. There's no chance that they're going to free substantial numbers of hostages because, again, what are you going to do? Search every single building? Israel's not willing to do it. Or if they're smart, they won't try. So they realize that the only way to get these hostages out is to negotiate. And right now they're in the stakes raising phase, right? The stakes are very high. The stakes are very dangerous. But at some point you're going to move from setting the stakes to conducting the negotiation. And getting those hostages back would be a political victory for Netanyahu. It would validate his movement, his military action, and would validate the tremendous amount of international credibility that Israel has burned through this operation. Now, for the IDF's part, they are pointing out, of course, that Hamas is using stationing rockets in playgrounds and swimming pools. And yeah, 100%, guys. This is absolutely something that Hamas does. 1,000,000%. They play these games all the time. They're waiting for Israel to launch strikes on civilian centers. And don't kid yourself. In the U.S., in Iraq, it was common for Iraqi insurgents to shoot at U.S. forces from mosques. And then if the U.S. forces shot back, they would have civilians, they would get them riled up about, can you believe the U.S. forces shot a rocket into our mosque? How dare they? Don't they know this is sacred? This is very, very standard insurgent tactics. That said, the difference is U.S. forces were told, if somebody shoots at you from a mosque, just roll on by. I swear to God. And it drove soldiers absolutely bananas that they were just like, don't shoot back at a mosque. Or sometimes they would say, small arms only, right? Like, use a little discretion. But that's how you had to fight the war. I don't know what to tell you. People got so mad about it. And yeah, there were two standards. There was but when you're the guy with all the guns and the aircraft and the rocket launchers and the Mark 19s and the up armored vehicles, when you're the big dog in the fight, it sucks. The politicians expect more from you. They're like, yeah, we gave you, and it's fair. It's not crazy. They go, listen, we spent all this money. We gave you everything you wanted, but in exchange, you got to fight our way. And it's a fair deal. It's not a bad deal, right? Hamas doesn't have any tanks, so they don't have any rules. That's because nobody wants to support them because they're terrorists, right? They're dirtbags. But if you're the good guys and you have real friends, you got to behave a certain way, right? And again, I lived it. I was a soldier on the receiving end of that stuff. So I understand how annoying the constraint is. I understand how aggravating it is. And the real question you might want to ask yourself as a soldier that you ask yourself is, why are we even here, right? Like, why are we even here if everyone's so mad, the culture is so alien, nobody wants us here, nobody cares that we're here, like, and what are we achieving through this larger goal? And that's the thing you got to ask yourself. What exactly is Israel achieving here, right? Are they going to, they're like, we're going to wipe out Hamas. We're going to end Hamas as a political entity. But let's just talk for a minute about the map. If you're Hamas, where do you think at least some of Hamas is currently located? Here? Or the place where they're not doing any fighting? Are they located here in the spot with fighting, or here in the spot without fighting? Guys, Hamas, the organization is, some of them, a lot of them, are all sitting here. Some of them probably went to Egypt. Some of them are sitting in Qatar. A lot of them are just waiting for this to blow over, and they're going to move right back in because that's how insurgent networks work. And the Israelis know this. So you got to ask yourself, what are you really going to achieve? Like, what are these airstrikes achieving? You're killing some Hamas fighters. You're killing some civilians. You're killing some Hamas fighters. And you're baiting Hamas fighters into a fight, but they're only going to send the fighters they can afford to lose. That's how insurgents work. Once they take losses that they're like, hey, we don't want to put this out there anymore. We want to save some ammunition for later. You just don't shoot them. You just let the tanks drive by. You put down your rockets, you put them in a crate somewhere, you put on your clothes, and you watch TV. That's what it means to be an insurgent. Like, and the Israelis know this. And so then you got to ask yourself, right? Then you're stuck with these big meta questions about war. Like, what was the point of all of it? And you could say the same thing about the Hamas leadership, right? They sent 1,000 dudes into Israel, killed a whole bunch of women and children, right? And some military targets, but a lot of just women and children. And for what? Like, what did they achieve? Are they closer to Palestinian freedom? Like, were those women and children the obstacle to Palestinian freedom? No, of course not. Right? Just a bunch of people died to achieve literally nothing. To achieve, like to make content, basically, to so that everybody could have a press conference and all the leadership in both sides could just when you've been on the receiving, when you've been the grindy grunt of some of these wars, you develop a real healthy perspective of the people who run these sort of operations. Anyway, guys, one last thing that I thought was really fun is that you don't even have to be one of the belligerents to be mad at the way the level of hypocrisy. Because in the U.S. State Department, U.S. diplomats, a lot of them have signed on to a memo, particularly low and mid-ranking Democrats, criticizing Israel's policy towards the Israelis. And the gist of it is that the U.S. basically says Israel can do no wrong. And they say, we must publicly criticize, this is the U.S. State Department, not their official position, but these are diplomats within them, saying we must publicly criticize Israel's violation of international norms, such as failure to limit offensive operations to legitimate military targets, and, quote, when Israel supports settler violence or other illegal land seizures or employs excessive force against Palestinians, we must communicate publicly that this goes against our American values so that Israel doesn't act with impunity. It's marked sensitive but classified, which means we can all talk about it, right? And the core idea is that as America, there's no ally that we love so much we don't criticize, right? Then our unwillingness to say Israel does some bad things, quote, contributes to regional public perceptions, this is in the Middle Eastern, Muslim, and Arab world, that the United States is a biased and dishonest actor, which at best does not advance and at worst harms U.S. interests worldwide. And it's true. If the U.S. was just even mild in its criticism of Israel, then a lot of Muslim nations would feel better about partnering with the U.S. on a variety of endeavors. And right now, they don't. The U.S. is seen as just being like pretty much the enemy of the Arab world. And it's not really doing much to thwart that. And again, you got to ask, like, I don't know, is Israel, like, how much do they contribute regionally to the Middle East stability? That's a real question. It's not rhetorical. I don't know the answer. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you so much. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. And of course, we got to shout out our Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Remember that video is dropping today. Some of the fighting is absolutely wild, and we're going to be taking a look at all of it. Thanks so much to all of our supporters, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.